What if I told you that the greatest battle Nehemiah ever faced wasn't fought with swords, armies, or walls, but with words, fear, political manipulation, and spiritual warfare? What if I told you that behind the ruins of Jerusalem, behind the smoke, the shattered stones, and the broken gates, there were two men, Sanballat and Tobiah, who worked endlessly, ruthlessly, tirelessly, to stop God's purpose at any cost? What if I told you that the real war wasn't on the ground, but in secret councils, in forged letters, in psychological traps, and late-night conspiracies whispered in the shadows? What if I told you that Nehemiah wasn't just rebuilding a wall, he was restoring a destiny and exposing enemies who pretended to be friends? Because hidden behind the political titles, behind the alliances, behind the mockery and intimidation, were plots so dark, so coordinated, so desperate, that if Nehemiah had fallen for even one of their traps, Jerusalem would have remained in ruins forever. In this documentary, we uncover the psychological warfare Sanballat used to break the people, the infiltration network Tobiah built inside Jerusalem, the assassination attempts hidden beneath friendly invitations, the false prophets hired to manipulate Nehemiah, the unseen spiritual battle raging behind every stone placed in the wall. This is not just a story of construction. It is a story of conspiracy, a story of rivalry, a story of destiny versus destruction, a story of a leader who refused to bow to fear, and enemies who refused to give up. Prepare yourself, because what happened in Jerusalem was not just historical. It is spiritual warfare in its purest form. Whilst we delve and endeavor to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification icon to be updated first whenever we drop our next documentary. Because by the end of this video, you will understand why Nehemiah's courage shook nations, why his enemies trembled, and how God turned every plot into dust. The morning sun rose slowly over the rugged hills of Judah, casting long, broken shadows across the ruins of Jerusalem. What once stood as a proud and fortified city, God's own dwelling place, now lay silent, wounded, and exposed. The stones were toppled. The gates were charred black. Wild bushes crept over forgotten pathways. Every sunrise was a reminder of past glory and present shame. Into this broken world stepped a man whose heart burned with a singular burden. Nehemiah, cupbearer to the most powerful king of his time, yet servant of a far greater God. His arrival was quiet, almost unnoticed. No trumpet, no parade, no army, just a man with a divine assignment. Nehemiah walked through the shattered remains of the fish gate, his robes brushing against heaps of debris. His eyes scanned every crack and crevice of the ruined walls. The cold wind carried the faint echo of children's laughter from distant houses. Families trying to live normal lives in a city with no protection. Nehemiah tightened his jaw. His heart beat faster. He had prayed for this moment. He had fasted for this moment. Now the burden of restoration rested on his shoulders. But while Jerusalem welcomed hope, someone else woke up that morning filled with irritation and dread. Someone who did not want to see the city rise again. His name was Sanballat the Horonite, a regional governor, wealthy, influential, deeply political. He had benefited from Jerusalem's weakness. To him, a restored Jerusalem meant power lost, influence reduced, control slipping. He had watched the Jews live in disgrace, and he preferred it that way. So when word reached him that Nehemiah had arrived with the king's letters and authority, Sanballat's face twisted into disbelief. "Another dreamer from Judah?" he hissed. "No," replied a voice beside him, laced with sarcasm and caution. "A dangerous one." This was Tobiah the Ammonite, the clever strategist, the whisperer, the man skilled in turning rumors into weapons. Unlike Sanballat, who wielded influence like a hammer, Tobiah worked like poison. Slow, subtle, silent, yet deadly. Together, They formed a partnership rooted not in friendship, but in shared fear, the fear of a rising Jerusalem. That evening, when the city grew quiet, Nehemiah slipped away from the crowds. He mounted a horse and took only a few trusted men with him. No announcement, no public plans. He moved discreetly through the broken valleys surrounding Jerusalem, inspecting every gap in the wall, every burned gate, every fallen stone. The moonlight revealed the city's shame. The Spirit revealed its potential. His horse struggled to step over mounds of broken limestone and rotting timber, but Nehemiah pressed on. He paused now and then, touching the cold stones with his hands, like a priest tending to a wounded altar. "This is not just rebuilding," he whispered to himself. "This is restoration. This is God's work." It was close to midnight when he returned to the city. The men with him exchanged troubled glances. The task seemed impossible, but Nehemiah's eyes were firm, burning with determination. The next morning, at the square before the water gate, the leaders, priests, and nobles gathered. Their faces were tired, worn by years of discouragement. Some doubted anything could change. Others simply feared failure. Nehemiah stood before them, lifted a scroll, and declared, "The hand of my God has been upon me. The king has granted us favor. Now, let us rise up and build." For a moment there was silence. Then one voice whispered, "Rise up and build." It spread like fire. "Rise up and build. Rise up and build." Hope returned to Jerusalem. Hammers were gathered. Wood was measured. Stones were reclaimed from the rubble. Families prepared to rebuild the wall section by section. But in Samaria, the news reached Sanballat like a stone hitting still water. He slammed his fist onto a wooden table. "They dare to rebuild? They dare to challenge us?" Tobiah leaned back, smirking. "Let them build," he hissed. "Even a fox climbing on their wall will make it fall." Sanballat laughed, but his laughter carried venom. "Then we will mock them, break their confidence, crush their spirit before the first stone is laid." And so began the first wave of psychological warfare. Sanballat rode to the outskirts of Jerusalem with soldiers behind him. From a hill, loud enough for the workers to hear, he shouted, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish in a day?" Tobiah added mockingly, "Whatever they build, even a fox running on it will break it down." The workers felt humiliation burn in their chests. Some dropped their tools. Others stared at the ground in silence. This was not just mockery, it was a strategic attempt to destroy morale before progress even began. But Nehemiah did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not negotiate. He prayed, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Do not let their insults break us." Then he stood, clasped the hands of the nearest workers, and said, "Do not be afraid. Let us continue." And the people returned to work. Stone by stone, gate by gate, family by family, the rebuilding began. But Sanballat and Tobiah watched in frustration as the wall began to rise. Their mockery had failed. Their laughter had not stopped the work. So they escalated. Now, they sent messengers carrying intimidating threats. They spread rumors that Nehemiah planned to crown himself king. They whispered lies among the nearby tribes to turn nations against Jerusalem. Fear crept through the people. Some of the workers approached Nehemiah. "The workers are getting tired. The stones are too many. The enemies are plotting against us." Nehemiah's response was unshakable. "Do not listen to fear. Listen to God." He stationed families armed with swords, spears, and bows along the weakest parts of the wall. Every builder carried a trowel in one hand and a weapon in the other. "Remember the Lord," Nehemiah declared, "and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses." The people drew strength from his words. Sanballat and Tobiah watched from afar as the Jews returned to work with renewed courage, refusing to bow to intimidation. With every stone lifted, their anger grew. With every gate repaired, their fear deepened. With every prayer Nehemiah made, their influence weakened. By the time the sun set behind the hills, the wall had risen higher than ever expected. Families who once hid behind broken walls now stood with purpose. The sound of construction echoed across Jerusalem like a song of revival. Nehemiah looked upon the progress and whispered, "God is with us." But beyond the valley, in the shadows of Samaria, Sanballat and Tobiah prepared their next move. One darker, more cunning, more desperate, because they now understood something terrifying. This was not just a rebuilding project. It was a divine mission, and divine missions cannot be stopped by men. The heat of midday pressed heavily on Jerusalem as hammers clanged and dust rose like a cloud around the workers. The wall was now halfway rebuilt. What had once looked like scattered ruins now began to form a clear, defined shape of protection. A wall of identity, dignity, and destiny. Families labored side by side, young and old, priest and merchant, artisan and soldier. The progress was miraculous and infuriating to their enemies. Far beyond the northern hills, in the fortified region of Samaria, Sanballat paced inside his stone courtyard. His robe swung angrily behind him. The scroll in his hand trembled, a report from a spy stationed near Jerusalem. "Their wall rises rapidly," the message read. "The gaps are closing. The people are unified." Sanballat crushed the scroll in his fist. "Unified," he muttered. "Unity is dangerous. Unity gives them strength." Tobiah stood at the corner of the room, his face twisted with concern, though he hid it beneath a smug smile. "We underestimated them," Tobiah admitted. "Nehemiah is more determined than we expected." Sanballat slammed his fist on a table. "He must be stopped. Not slowed, not mocked, stopped." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And if we must gather the nations to do it, then so be it." Over the next days, whispers traveled across borders like smoke from an unseen fire. Sanballat sent messengers to Geshem the Arab, a powerful tribal leader whose influence stretched across the southern deserts. He sent envoys to the Ammonites to stir Tobiah's people into hostility. He reached out to the Ashdodites, a fierce people along the western plains known for violence and intimidation. One by one, the leaders responded. By the time the alliance was complete, Jerusalem was surrounded on nearly every side. Samaria to the north, Ammon to the east, Ashdod to the west, Arabian tribes to the south. A ring of hostility, a noose tightening. Back in Jerusalem, Nehemiah noticed scouts lurking in the hills, movement in the forests, and fires burning outside the valleys at night. He gathered the leaders and said, "Our enemies have joined forces. They intend to fight us." Fear flickered in their eyes. "Then what do we do?" one of the nobles asked. Nehemiah lifted his face toward heaven. "We pray," he said simply, "and we continue the work." But this was no ordinary prayer. This was a cry of warfare. "Lord, give us strength. Frustrate their plans. Blind their strategies." When the prayer ended, Nehemiah reorganized the workers. Half of the men built the wall. The other half held spears, shields, and bows. Every builder carried a sword by his side. Every gatekeeper kept watch day and night. From a distance, Sanballat watched the transformation. "They prepare for war," he said in shock. Tobiah's face darkened. "Then we must find another way." The alliance had not stopped the work. The soldiers had not stopped the work. The fear had not stopped the work. So Sanballat came up with something more subtle, more dangerous, more deceptive. "Send a letter to Nehemiah," he ordered. "Invite him to a meeting in the Valley of Ono." The Valley of Ono was a neutral ground, or so it seemed, beautiful, quiet, distant, and perfect for an ambush. Nehemiah received the letter while overseeing the builders securing the northern gate. A scribe handed him the scroll with a deep bow. Nehemiah broke the seal and read, "Come, let us meet together in the plain of Ono." A call for diplomacy, a gesture of peace. But Nehemiah felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something was wrong. He studied the wording, the tone, the unexpected politeness of men who had spent weeks insulting and threatening him. He saw the trap immediately. "They intend to harm me," he said quietly to his officers. The workers gathered, anxious for his response. Nehemiah dictated his reply without hesitation. "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" The messenger rode off. But within hours, the same invitation returned. A second time, a third time, a fourth time. The same trap, the same insistence, the same desperation. Nehemiah responded the same way each time. "I cannot come down." To Sanballat and Tobiah, these words carried a sting. To Jerusalem, these words became a battle cry. To history, they became a symbol of refusing distraction while doing God's work. Tobiah was not finished. If physical threats and political traps failed, he would use something harder to detect: influence. He had family ties within Jerusalem's nobility. He was connected to wealthy traders. Some nobles admired him. Others owed him favors. Through this web, Tobiah began sending secret letters to Nehemiah, letters meant to shake his confidence. Some were polite, some were mocking, some were threatening, but all of them were designed to weaken Nehemiah internally rather than externally. Behind closed doors, several nobles spoke highly of Tobiah, telling Nehemiah, "Tobiah is a good man. He means well. He is misunderstood." Nehemiah knew better. Tobiah's friendliness was a cloak. His connections were weapons. His influence was a battlefield. Yet Nehemiah refused to be intimidated. "I will not fear their threats," he prayed. But Sanballat and Tobiah were not done. Their alliance had failed. Their threats had failed. Their political traps had failed. Their network of intimidation had failed. It was time for something darker. Late one evening, as the lamps flickered inside Jerusalem, Nehemiah visited the house of Shemaiah son of Delaiah, a man known to be a prophet. Shemaiah sat anxiously near the doorway, his eyes full of urgency. "I must speak with you," he whispered. "They are coming tonight. Your enemies, Sanballat, Tobiah, the nations, they will kill you." Nehemiah felt a sudden tension. "Come," Shemaiah urged. "Let us hide inside the temple. Shut the doors. Only there you will be safe." The air felt wrong. The urgency felt manufactured. The fear felt rehearsed. Nehemiah looked into Shemaiah's eyes and saw it. Fear planted by payment. Prophecy twisted by bribery. A trap disguised as divine counsel. He stepped back and said firmly, "Should a man like me flee? And should I enter the temple to save my life? I will not go." The false prophet froze, his plan exposed. Nehemiah continued, "I see it now. God has not sent you. Sanballat and Tobiah have hired you." It was the final blow to their conspiracy. They had tried everything, failed at everything. Yet Jerusalem still stood. The wall still rose. The people still worked. Nehemiah lifted his eyes heavenward. "Lord, remember Tobiah and Sanballat according to their works." Outside, the enemies retreated in frustration, realizing they were fighting against something far greater than a wall. They were fighting against God's purpose. Dawn broke softly over Jerusalem, casting a warm, golden sheen over the rising wall. What had begun as scattered rubble now stood as a near-complete structure, wrapping the city in the embrace of protection it had long been denied. The voices of workers lifted into the morning sky, the shout of masons shaping stone, the grunt of men hauling timber, the laughter of children running among the builders. The people had changed. They were no longer afraid, no longer broken. no longer living in disgrace. But this progress had driven Sanballat and Tobiah into a frenzy. They watched from a distance as the final gaps in the wall began to close, the breaches that once made Jerusalem vulnerable now shrinking with every passing day. Their plans had failed. Their traps had failed. Their intimidation had failed. And that failure now filled their hearts with a desperate, choking panic. Sanballat stormed into his council chamber in Samaria, his robe sweeping across the floor like a wave of anger. "How is this possible?" he bellowed. "In 50 days they have done what no nation has dared to attempt." Tobiah stood beside him, jaw clenched, his mind racing. "We must strike now," he insisted. "If we delay any longer, the wall will be finished." Geshem the Arab leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "What do you propose? Another army? Another alliance?" Tobiah shook his head. "No, not armies, not swords. Something deeper." He unfurled a scroll, a long list of names. "These," he said, tapping the paper, "are our contacts inside Jerusalem, nobles, merchants, families connected to me by marriage and loyalty." Sanballat's eyes glimmered. "You want to use information." "Not just information," Tobiah whispered. "Fear, influence, pressure from within. If violence couldn't stop Nehemiah, perhaps betrayal could." In Jerusalem, Nehemiah sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Though the wall was nearly complete, the enemy's activity increased. Messengers lingered near the valleys. Horses moved at night. Fires burned in unusual places on distant hills. One morning, as Nehemiah walked along the northern section of the wall, he paused and took in the sight of workers setting the final stones. "Strengthen my hands, Lord," he whispered. "Let not the enemies prevail." He knew the enemy was not done. He knew a final storm was coming. But he also knew God was with them. And so the people worked, with stronger hands, with steadier hearts, with unshakable faith. It happened late one evening as Nehemiah sat reviewing the day's progress with a few trusted leaders. A nervous noble stepped forward, pale and trembling. "There is something you must know," he said. Tobiah has influence over many of our leaders. He sends letters. They send letters back. They speak well of him. They protect him." Nehemiah's eyes hardened. The man continued, "Some here in Jerusalem are bound to him by marriage, others by business. There are those who praise his good deeds, even while he threatens you." The truth hit Nehemiah like a cold wind. Tobiah wasn't just an enemy outside the walls. He was tangled inside them. Every day, messengers carried letters between Jerusalem and Tobiah's household. Every day, nobles whispered his praises. Every day, Tobiah's words tried to pierce Nehemiah's resolve. "You cannot finish this wall. You are not safe. You have divided the people. You will be destroyed." But Nehemiah would not bend. He lifted one of Tobiah's threatening letters and held it up to the lantern flame. "This is not the voice of authority," he said quietly. "This is the voice of fear, trying to enter my heart." He folded the letter and set it aside. "Let their words return upon their own heads," he prayed, "and strengthen the hands of your servant." The next day, Nehemiah confronted the nobles. "No more alliances with Tobiah," he said firmly. "No more letters. No more divided loyalties. Jerusalem must be whole or we will fall." His voice carried power. His faith carried weight. Slowly, the hidden ties began to break. The web Tobiah had spun began to unravel. And with every severed connection, the enemy's influence weakened. The 52nd day arrived. The day history would remember. As the sun climbed above the mountains, the last stone was lifted. Workers stood together, breathless, covered in dust and sweat. The sound of hammers fell silent. Nehemiah walked to the highest point of the wall, overlooking the valleys that once exposed the city to every danger. Below him, thousands gathered, mothers with children, priests in their garments, soldiers, builders, elders, all waiting, watching, hoping. Slowly, Nehemiah raised both hands. "It is finished," he declared. A wave of shouts erupted through the city. The wall, the symbol of their identity, security, and God's favor, stood complete, strong, whole, unbroken. From a distance the nations watched. Their hearts melted, for they knew no people could rebuild ruins like this in only 52 days. No nation could unite this quickly. No workers could achieve this much under threat. This was not the work of men. This was the work of God. Sanballat stood on a distant ridge, staring in stunned silence. Tobiah bowed his head, his breath shaking. Geshem cursed beneath his breath. Fear washed over them. If the wall had been rebuilt against their attacks, if the people had survived every threat, if Nehemiah had discerned every trap, then Jerusalem's God must be real and unstoppable. But Nehemiah's mission did not end with stone and wood. The true restoration of Jerusalem required purity, not just of walls, but of leadership, worship, and loyalty. He went through the city, examining every chamber, every room, every position of authority. That's when he discovered something shocking. Tobiah had been given a luxurious chamber inside the temple itself, a room where offerings, incense, and sacred items were supposed to be stored, now occupied by an enemy of God's work. Nehemiah's anger ignited. "How dare they?" he muttered, his voice trembling. He stepped into the chamber. The scent of foreign perfume lingered in the air. Tobiah's belongings, scrolls, garments, furniture, filled the room. Nehemiah grabbed a chest and hurled it out. Then another, and another. Every item belonging to Tobiah was thrown out into the courtyard. Priests watched in shocked silence. "Cleanse this room," Nehemiah commanded. "Purify it according to the law. Restore it to God." And it was done. Nehemiah then confronted the gatekeepers, priests, and leaders. "You have tolerated corruption in the house of God. No more. You have allowed enemies to influence holy things. No more." He reorganized the temple staff. He restored the tithes. He appointed faithful men to guard the gates. He removed corrupt leaders with unwavering resolve. Jerusalem became strong not only in stone but in spirit. When Nehemiah finally looked upon the city at sunset, the wall shining red under the fading light, he whispered, "Remember me, O God, for the good I have done, and remember my enemies for their evil." Sanballat and Tobiah disappeared from the narrative of history, their names preserved only as warnings of those who fight God's purpose and lose. But Nehemiah's legacy lived on. The man who rebuilt a nation with prayer, courage, and unshakable faith. Before we continue, if this kind of deep, cinematic Bible storytelling inspires you, then make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. It helps this mission reach more people and keeps powerful stories like this alive. And if you want to go even deeper, become a channel member today. Get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early uploads, special insights, and premium biblical breakdowns you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe. Join the membership. Let's build this community together, one powerful story at a time.